it. But you're constantly beating yourself up over not having done enough to help your mother, which I think is an entirely natural thing. But looking back now, do you really think there's anything else you could have done?
There are things I said to my mother, things I called her that I wish I hadn't. Yeah, definitely. I mean, some things I did, even when I was trying to be helpful, that were just plain stupid. I tell the story of, mum and dad split up. I had to split up the household furnishings, some going to dad, some going to mum. I don't know why dad wasn't doing that really, but anyway, he wasn't around. I was doing it. Mum went to live in one flat. She ended up losing that because she ran up a terrible debt at the off licence. She ended up in a mobile home, and then I managed to buy a place for her in Glasgow, which is where she was from originally. And I went to stay with her, and I took her to Marks and Spencer's to buy a couple of new outfits. And I came back 3 weeks later, and she'd taken all the clothes back to Marks and Sparks and exchanged it for vodka. And I was absolutely furious with her. I mean, red mist descended upon me. I said all sorts of horrible things to her. But it was actually stupid of me to have... Why go to Marks and Sparks? It was obvious what she'd do. Just obvious.
That's the Labour MP and Government Minister Sir Chris Bryant telling us about his experiences of his mother's alcoholism. And by the way, if you've had similar experiences, you can get support from the National Association for Children of Alcoholics. Their website is nacoa.org.uk, and you can listen to the full conversation with Chris Bryant by subscribing to the Iain Dale All Talk podcast on Global Player or the brand new LBC app. Now, coming up is Cross Question. We have with us Baroness Harriet Harman, Labour peer, a very coffee Labour peer at the moment.
Sorry about that. Nicky's
and former Deputy Leader.
Thank you very much.
Who co-hosts the podcast Electoral Dysfunction. Baroness Nicky Morgan is a Conservative peer and former Cabinet Minister. Lionel Barber, journalist, author and broadcaster, who's a former editor of the Financial Times and is now a co-presenter of the Media Confidential podcast. And Ash Sarkar is here, contributing editor of Novara Media. They're here to take your calls on 0345 6060 973. And you can watch us, of course, on Global Player and the LBC app.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Angela Rayner says she's considered stepping down after admitting she underpaid stamp duty on a flat she bought in Brighton and Hove. The Deputy Prime Minister has referred herself to the standards watchdog after she says she received bad tax advice. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch says her position is untenable. But Sir Keir Starmer defended his deputy during Prime Minister's questions.
I am very proud to sit alongside a Deputy Prime Minister who is building 1.5 million homes, who is bringing the biggest upgrade to workers' rights in a generation, and who's come from a working class background to be Deputy Prime Minister of this country.
At least 3 people have been killed and around 20 injured after the iconic Gloria funicular tram in the Portuguese capital Lisbon derailed and crashed. Emergency workers are pulling people out of the wreckage. It's reported 9 of those injured are in a serious condition. Nigel Farage has described the UK as authoritarian over its treatment of people like Graham Linehan. The Father Ted writer was arrested at Heathrow over complaints about his tweets on trans people. And the head of the Bank of England's warned there is considerably more doubt over the future of interest rate cuts. Andrew Bailey's told MPs the risks of inflation have gone up. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 61 points at 91.77. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.15. LBC weather, occasional showers tonight, heavy in the southwest by dawn, dry elsewhere and lows of 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. It's 2 minutes past 8 here on LBC. Joining us on the panel tonight, to my right, Baroness Nicky Morgan, who is a non-affiliated peer, former Conservative Cabinet Minister and currently chair of the Advertising Standards Authority. Next to her, Ash Sarkar, contributing editor of Novara Media. To my left, Baroness Harriet Harman, Labour peer and former deputy leader, who co-hosts the podcast Electoral Dysfunction. And next to her, Lionel Barber, journalist, author and broadcaster, former editor of the Financial Times and now a co-presenter of the Media Confidential podcast. They're here to take your questions on 0345 6060 973. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player and the LBC app.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first question. It's from Archie in Inverness. Does the panel agree that the Angela Rayner debacle demonstrates that we can only expect our politicians to admit to wrongdoing when there remains no remotely tenable lie left to tell? What a cynical question that is. Harriet Harman, let's come to you first. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt that you were going to have to resign over something?
Oh, numerous times. You've probably got a better memory for them than I have.
I can't think of one.
I mean, the thing about being in government, and obviously Nicky will know this very well, is that it's a great privilege and it's a very high office, but it feels sometimes like walking a high wire, and nobody gives, I suppose quite rightly, politicians any benefit of the doubt, and nobody seems to believe politicians can ever act in good faith. So it's jeopardy. From the moment you wake up in the morning till the moment you go to bed at night, and also whilst you're still asleep, there is jeopardy all the time. So I was like nearly falling off the edge loads of times, and indeed once did fall off the edge. But let's not talk about me.
Lionel, looking at it from the other point of view as a newspaper editor, you can almost sense that some newspapers are scenting blood here. But, I mean, what about the cynicism expressed in the question? Because there will be many people listening tonight that believe that all politicians are inevitably doing wrong. They get no benefit of the doubt. Now, Angela Rayner has come out today, opened her heart, really, in many ways, in the statement and the interview that she did. And yet there will still be people that think, no, she's a wrong 'un.
Well, it's deeply corrosive if the media always assumes that politicians are lying. That's clearly not the case here in the regarding Angela Rayner's somewhat complicated living arrangements. I mean, she was in the middle of a divorce. She's also trying to protect the privacy of her children, one of whom is disabled. But there are 3 properties involved, and she was employing supposedly sophisticated tax advice, which doesn't seem to have been first class, and she's taken too long to come clean. Now, again, there's a complication here, which is always a problem for the media, which is she had in effect an injunction to protect ostensibly to protect the interests of the children. So if you take all that into account, it's not so black and white. If you look at it superficially, here you have a single mother from a young age, working class, quite happy to talk about soaking the rich, and then seems to have 3 homes. You can see why the story was pursued. Last point, this was a completely legitimate story for the press to pursue. Yes, the Telegraph wants a scalp, but it was a legitimate story, and she hasn't handled it very well.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of Lionel mentioned and said it was like an injunction. I think it was an order of the family court, and family courts have to remain private in the interests of children unless you apply to the court and say there's an overriding interest for me to be able to disclose something that's happened in court. So an injunction is usually what somebody applies for in order to stop everybody talking about it.
Yeah, you can tell that I'm a journalist, not a lawyer.
Yes,
Harriet, you're completely right.
Thank you. It was quite the other way around. But the other thing I would say is that the one thing I can never imagine Angela Rayner doing is sitting down and saying to some tax advisor, can you tell me, let's work out how I can minimise my tax. There is nothing about the way Angela goes about things which is about trying to pay less tax or enrich herself. So I absolutely will firmly believe that she has not intended to pay less tax than she should. And, I know people will think this is a bit of an excuse, but she doesn't come from a family background where people have accountants or have, my parents had accountants. My parents had owned their own property, so knew about buying and selling property. And she doesn't come from that background.
I want you to imagine going back to 2009-10, well, say under the Cameron government, where you had a Tory housing minister who had done exactly the same here. You'd be all over that, wouldn't you?
Well, all I'm saying is what I know about Angela Rayner. And, Lionel's said that it's a legitimate story and people are going after it. And indeed, she's now referred herself to the ethics advisor to the Prime Minister. But I'll tell you one thing about the ethics advisor and the code, is in this world of social media, I'm not sure that this code really still works in the way it should, because it says you've not only got to avoid wrongdoing, but you've got to avoid the perception of wrongdoing.
Caesar's wife must be above suspicion.
But the trouble is now, suspicion is absolutely endemic in relation to everybody on the internet. It says, ministers must ensure that no conflict arises or appears to arise between their public interests and their private public duties and their private interests. So no conflict arises or appears to arise. Well, all you have to do is go on social media and everybody's appearing to be doing everything wrong. So
just one second. Just finally, though, if Sir Laurie Magnus finds in any way that she has acted wrongly, whether it was intentional or not, she will have to resign, won't she?
Well, I hope it doesn't get to that, because I think
But if it does,
I wish her well. I think she's a great asset
but
to
if
the
it
government.
does,
and it will have been a completely honest mistake by somebody who's not about, greedily enriching herself. So I'm not going to go down the path of saying if X happens, she'll have to go,
Ash.
because I'm hoping it won't happen.
I think that you can empathise on a human level and say she's clearly in some difficult personal circumstances. I think lots of people have empathy for the challenges that come with having a disabled child. And I think you can hold that space whilst also at the same time being of the view that when you are Deputy Prime Minister, you are held to different standards, and that's good and it's proper. And this is where I completely disagree with you, Harriet, I'm afraid, which is about conflict of interest and perceived conflict of interest. The reason why it's important that the word perceived is in there is that you're not asking us to live in a politician's head and think, OK, but really what was their intention? That you do take the view that how things come across, the public trust in politicians, that really matters, and it should be taken care of. It should be nurtured and looked after. I understand that being a politician must be a really high-pressure job. You take it home with you. It must be a source of a lot of anxiety. But I guess that's what the money and the power is for. It's a little bit tiny violin. It's like, oh, it was really stressful. She made a human mistake. Lots of people in this country don't get to make human mistakes and don't get the benefit of the doubt, especially poorer people, quite frankly.
Nicky Morgan, I sort of keep going back to the expenses scandal. Now, you weren't in Parliament when that was going on. We should emphasise. But a lot of people caught up in that, whether they were Tory, Labour, whatever, they had taken advice on what they should do from the House of Commons Fees Office, and indeed maybe from legal or accountants. And yet they were still found guilty by the Court of Public Opinion, even though, my friend Jackie Smith is a good example of this, where she was accused of flipping her houses, and she said, but that's what they told me to do.
I think they're very different situations. I think the expenses, and that's is a different issue. It involved obviously taxpayers' money. I think
so does this in a way.
Stamp duty, right?
Well, it's a different thing. I think.
Well, it means the public purse is 40 grand less well off than it would have been otherwise.
Well, potentially, that's what the tax council and tax advisors have got to get to the bottom of, and everything else. The simple answer to I think where we started, which was Lionel's point, which is if we are totally cynical about all politicians always, then even more this country is going to get the politicians that it deserves. I would have thought the lesson from today is why, yet again, would anybody want to go into politics, actually, because she's had to sit there and lay out all of her family circumstances, the divorce, the settlement with the hospital, the disabled son. And I think the question at the end, about lying, I'm obviously we'll have to see whether everything is out there. But if you can't say something because of court order, and you actually presumably had to go to the court last night and say, I need this to be lifted so that I can explain. The question today, Lionel's right. It's perfectly legitimate for the press to have asked these questions. What we don't know, of course, is whether she actually said to the journalists when they started, look, I can't talk about this publicly, but this is the situation. My suspicion is she didn't, which is why they carried on digging. But now she said it. Keir Starmer had better hope that Angela Rayner has said absolutely everything today about this, because I think we've been on this programme before and said it's the cover-up that always gets you. If there is anything that she has left out of the picture today, that will make life very difficult and very uncomfortable for her and for Number 10. I personally think that if she's put everything out there, I think the public might not like it. They might say, well, you pay it. But I think there will be some understanding that this involves complicated family circumstances. But Harriet's point, and I agree in a way with you, Ash, which is, as a senior politician, you have to think the whole time. I used to be paranoid about making sure that I'd not only done the right thing, I was driving at the right speed, and I've had plenty of parking, speeding fines. But, you've got to try and think the whole time.
70.
Actually, I said plenty.
Oh, sorry.
Not 70, blimey.
It's more than Harriet.
Yes, Lewis Hamilton over here.
You've got to think the whole time, exactly, not just what have I done the right thing, but have I been seen to do the right thing? And can I justify it if it ends up on the front page of a newspaper? And that's the big test now for Angela Rayner and everything else. But you can't be cynical all the time about the people who put themselves forward. Otherwise, we are going to get nobody decent to try to run this country.
And I'm with Harriet. I think it's the perception test is nonsense. Let's deal with the facts. Was she lying or misleading everybody about whether this was her principal residence, secondary residence? The issue about privacy, how far can she defend her position because she was trying to look after the interests of her children? This it has to be taken in the round. But regarding perception, sorry, Ash, don't agree.
Harriet, where does this leave Angela Rayner's position in the Labour Party? Because I was saying earlier in the programme that I thought she was the current under-the-bus candidate. If Keir Starmer fell by the wayside for whatever reason, she would be the one most likely to win a leadership election. Even if it all turns out right for her and she doesn't have to resign, it will have damaged her, won't it?
I think the Labour Party is very strongly supportive of Angela Rayner. She's very well liked. She's very energetic. I remember her coming to my constituency when I was an MP in Peckham, and she'd already done a constituency dinner somewhere over in East London, and then she came to my constituency event in a really sweating pub. Everybody was actually pouring sweat. She spoke to every single person there and made them feel 10 feet tall. She was really interested to hear about them. And that has got quite an electrifying effect on the Labour Party. And she's been doing that for years. And people think that she really cares and she understands them because she's had, a tough upbringing. So I think that if she gets through this, and I hope she will, it will be fine as far as the Labour Party is concerned. It does make it difficult when, if Rachel Reeves is saying everybody's got to be paying their tax, that's the most important thing. It makes it a little bit more anxious.
And Ash, how did the left see Angela Rayner now? Because she was always seen, when Jeremy Corbyn first came to power, she was seen as a Corbynista.
She was the momentum candidate for deputy party leader.
Indeed. So, but do they see her as a bit of a sellout now?
Well, I think that is the view of people who would have described themselves as Corbynites or socialists. For me, actually, it was something that Angela Rayner said on a sort of live podcast recording with Matt Ford that made me not want to vote Labour again. And what she said was, when it comes to terrorists, shoot first and ask questions later. Now, I understand in the case of a marauding terrorist why you'd want to shoot to kill policy, but I don't like the idea of any politician saying shoot first, ask questions later, when one of those questions might be, is this person really a terrorist? Because I was quite young when the shooting of John Charles de Menezes happened, but it had a real impact on me. That the decision by police to take a life is one of the most significant and profound things they can do. So to see a politician handling it so lightly and laughing it off.
What's about Ford podcast? He is a comedian. He's a brilliant interviewer.
Really, it's never made me laugh.
Really? Well, that maybe says more about you than him.
I'm not a funny person,
know.
clearly. But look, I just think that, and, you know, I put the questions to her office, you know, asking, do you want to clarify this? I wrote a piece about it. And they just completely stood by it. There were no caveats, no nuances. And I can understand why you do that. I can understand when, you know, Jeremy Corbyn was hauled over coals about shoot-to-kill policies, why politically you do it. But for me, it was just a sign that what's truthful and what's important was less significant to her than what was politically convenient. And that's when I made my decision.
I think it shows to me that she's not a calculating, you know, polished, ultra considerate. You know, she speaks more spontaneously. I think people recognise that.
She? Yeah, people like that.
Yeah, I think that people recognise that in her. She's not guarded.
No, but would you? It's not about being guarded. But wouldn't you want someone who, you know, was deputy leader of the party at that time? She's now a deputy prime minister to go. Actually, how police view suspects is really, really important. And someone who has come from a challenging
and that's no doubt what she believes. But she just made a flippant remark because she's not always.
Her office stood by it entirely when I was like, "Do you want to clarify this in any way?" They said no.
Right, we'll have more questions from you in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
20 past 8. Harriet Harman, Nicky Morgan, Lionel Barber and Ash Sarkar are here. Corey has promised me a biscuit if you can get through 2 questions in the next 10 minutes. So that is your challenge. Although given I'm on Manjaro, I probably won't accept it and stuff it back in his mouth. Right. Let's go to Mohammed in Ealing. Mohammed, very good evening. What would you like to say?
Very good evening to you too, Ian, and very good evening to all the panellists. My question is, in today's Britain, are police powers too restrictive of freedom of speech?
Well, this is obviously in the wake of what we were talking about in the last hour with the Graham Linehan tweets. He was greeted by 5 armed police officers at Heathrow. And then you have Nigel Farage, I would say, betraying his country in the United States today. Ash Sarkar.
Nigel goes to Washington, eh? When it comes to police powers and freedom of speech, I think there is a real problem. Now, Graham Linehan is someone who I think has a fixation and an obsession with trans people, a kind of monomania, but I don't think...
Possibly more trans activists than actually trans people, I would say.
Well, I mean, he tweets like dozens of times a day about trans people, but I don't think it should be illegal to be a fruitcake, quite frankly, all right? I think that of the 3 tweets which caused a problem, one of them could be interpreted as incitement, maybe. The other 2, I think, were offensive and vile, but again, not a case for the police. And unfortunately, this is part of a broader picture of the police getting involved where I think they shouldn't. And unfortunately, this has had the blessing of this Labour government. I think the prescription of Palestine action and the arrests of people for holding up placards saying, I support Palestine action, I oppose genocide, is a disgusting misuse of public resources. I don't think anyone in their right mind really thinks that, an 80-year-old retired GP is a serious terrorist sympathiser. And I think it's a way of trying to dampen and close down on debate in a way which ultimately I think inflames things. Because if you make it impossible for people to articulate their politics in an open way, I think you just further radicalise them.
Nicky?
Well, just pick on that last point. I think there are ways to articulate your politics that don't cross over into either hate speech or being against another group. I think, and I think we do have a tradition in this country of allowing people to say what they think, but there has to be a line. And whether it's Graham Linehan's tweets or whether it's what people are saying about obviously what's happening in Gaza, for example, I think my answer to this question is the law too restrictive on free speech? No. But what we are confusing in all this coverage is the difference between free speech, as in what's put on in Online Safety Act, which I was very involved with, which is the sort of conduct of the platforms, and things that are hate speech. And I think what people forget sometimes is that one person's ability to have free speech then can incite other people towards conduct that does tip over into crime. So I do think, I'm afraid, that there is a role for the police, perhaps, or in other cases it might be Ofcom as the regulator, which is a different issue, to think about what's out there. Is it a good use of police resources to have 5 armed policemen arresting somebody off a plane from the US? The answer is clearly not. And there are ways in which actually Graham Linehan could have been questioned. I don't know. I have a feeling, as you say, that he does this quite a lot, and I suspect there's a pattern there. And it may well be that there have been other conversations with the police which have not resolved matters, and therefore that was why they took.
Well, I think his argument
that
is that there's some ex-police officer who's got it in for him who constantly complains about him, and I think here surely, I mean, Harriet, maybe you can answer this as former Solicitor General. I mean, the police have got to deploy common sense, haven't they? And there are too many of these incidents where they don't deploy common sense, and they put so many resources into them. And I mean, somebody could write a book. In fact, I think people have written books about it. Andrew Doyle, I think, wrote one where over the years there have been too many of these incidents where you could legitimately say the police have approached it in the wrong way.
Well, it does seem the idea that 5 police officers, with all the drama of arresting him as he arrived back in the country, but we don't know what the background was. Your immediate thought is, why didn't they just send him an email or call him up and ask him to come for an appointment? But we don't know what the background was.
Well, we do.
But
we know. We've seen the tweets that they arrested him because.
No, but we don't know what their prior interaction with him was, which led them to, instead of doing something. But, instead, do we know about whether or not they tried to make an appointment with him? Because if their first thing was to arrest him, instead of trying to make an appointment with him, I think that is quite odd.
Well, as far as I know, that was exactly what happened.
Well, that is odd.
Yeah.
Especially 5 of them. I mean, it's like... free speech is obviously incredibly important and has to be protected, but it has its limitations. So you can't claim free speech if you incite, as Nicky said, violence, which then is used against somebody else. So that's a limit on free speech.
Okay,
and in terms of Palestine...
Sorry.
Okay.
I thought you were finished.
Oh, well, I was just going on to Ash's point about Palestine Action. It's basically not that you can't say, I'm against genocide in Palestine. It's that because Palestine Action is prescribed as a terrorist organisation, supporting them is then unlawful.
Do you think that's right, though?
We're going off the subject a little bit on this, if you don't mind.
So,
Lionel,
this country is turning itself into a laughing stock. The idea that an Irish comic is apprehended by 5 armed police officers at the airport over a tweet that was 5 months old, which is clearly absurd, fruitcake in quality. I mean, this is ridiculous.
It sounds so odd. You think it can't be right, though.
But you can't. It happened. There were 5 police officers there. You can't see 5 police officers in the street on the beat.
Very true.
I witnessed a Chinese tourist outside my apartment in central London have their phones and wallet taken by people on bike. This is what This is crime in London. The police need to be tackling those sorts of issues. They say they're constrained under the law. The law probably, in this sense, certainly is an ass. But the fact is, Iain, you've hit the nail on the head. You should hit somebody on the head. Maybe not. I don't want to incite violence here.
Careful.
Five police officers will be at the door.
Yeah, can you imagine?
No, but there's
I have had police officers at the door doing a radio show once, but that's another story.
But very simply, I mean, look, this is about applying common sense. They're not. This is a complete distraction. It's doing immense damage.
Well, in the interest of being rewarded with a biscuit, let's go to a follow-up call on this subject with Dominic in Chelsea. Dominic, go ahead. Hi.
Good evening, Iain and panel. My question is Nigel Farage a hypocrite or a traitor or both for heading to the United States and complaining about how the UK government handles free speech?
Harriet.
I'm just asking the question.
Okay.
Do you want to start with somebody else?
Lionel.
He's not a traitor. He doesn't deserve to be locked up in the Tower of London. He's grandstanding. Yeah. He's sucking up to Trump. He's sucking up to the free speech tech bros.
And betraying his country.
Well, I think he's dissing, he's discrediting the country. He's not completely wrong about free speech for the reasons we talked about.
No, but he didn't point out that Trump does exactly the same. If you want to get a visa to go to America, they want to know your social media record.
But that is correct. But that's not necessarily a treacherous action. I'm not defending Nigel Farage.
Sounds to me as if you are.
Well, I think he's He's discredited his country, he's talked down his country, he's hypocritical, just as Trump's hypocritical on free speech. And I won't be voting Reform UK either, just in case you are.
You surprise us all. Nicky.
Well, the irony, of course, is that when this particular Republican congressman and colleagues came over in the summer, and one of them in the meeting tried to say something critical about Trump, Nigel Farage shut him down and said, no, we're not talking about that. So, his limits on free speech, apply to what he thinks, but not what anybody else thinks. And that's the hypocritical bit. I mean, probably a traitor is going a little bit too far. I mean, the bigger question is, MPs have just had quite a long recess. This is the first week back. It's Prime Minister's questions. Why was he not in the House of Commons today? When was he last in the constituency? Why is he grandstanding over in the US? I mean, this is clearly a bandwagon that he thinks, yet another one, that he's going to jump on around free speech, rather than many of the other issues that I think people want to hear politicians.
I mean, I did call him a traitor earlier in the programme, and I don't take it back. And I quite like Nigel Farage personally, but when you go to a foreign country and give evidence before a congressional committee, which effectively has the effect of saying, well, you might want to impose a few more tariffs on us, and that might persuade the British government to make free speech better in our country. I do regard that as traitorous. Ash?
I think that Nigel Farage is definitely a hypocrite. I think that his actions are currently not in the interest of his country, the country that he claims to love so much. But I think that traitor is just that step too far. Like, I really do. And we're in danger of agreeing too much on this panel. I think one of the...
Not with me, you're not.
I mean, it's the first time Iain's ever been way out there. Hang on a second.
You've disappeared into the Thames.
I'm normally the moderate one.
No, you're the spice in the soup tonight. Yeah. That's what you are. You're the spice in the soup. But I think when it comes to Nigel Farage, like he only has a problem with curtailment of freedom of speech when it's people that he regards in some way as being on his side. So when it came to,
well, he's not alone in that, to be fair.
Well, no, I think lots of people are hypocrites, right? And I think all of us have our biases and prejudices, which mean we turn a blind eye to our own side in various ways. But I think that when it comes to Trump and JD Vance, I mean, on the one hand, they're decrying, the case of Lucy Connolly. I think that it was a too harsh a sentence, but she did plead guilty to the most serious offence. Right? Yeah. Like, that is what happened. So on the one hand, you've got Lucy Connolly becoming a core celeb for the global hard right. But on the other hand, you've got Trump and JD Vance using immigration enforcement to target pro-Palestine protesters on campuses across America and detaining, new father Mahmoud Khalil for weeks, if not months. So I think that going to America to decry, Britain's attacks on freedom of speech is to sort of, go into a steakhouse and be like, what about vegetarianism? You're going to the source of the problem.
But let's look at the bright side. all of the opposition parties to Reform UK are going to use those clips in the election and say this man does not believe in his country.
Well, Mohammed, Dominic, thank you for provoking a very good discussion. Let's go to the news at 8:32 with Daryl Jackson while I consume my chocolate digestive.
The Prime Minister's backed his deputy, Angela Rayner, despite her admitting she didn't pay enough stamp duty when she bought a flat in Brighton and Hove. The Housing Secretary's referred herself to the standards watchdog, but says the error was because of her complex situation and not an attempt to dodge taxes. At least 3 people have died after a funicular tram derailed and crashed in Lisbon. Emergency services in Portugal say about 20 others have been injured. And the head of the Met Police says his officers are being put in an impossible situation over the enforcement of online hate speech rules. Samart Rowley's called for law change after a backlash to the arrest of the co-creator of Father Ted, Graham Linehan, for social media posts. LBC weather, occasional showers tonight, heavy in the southwest by dawn, dry elsewhere, lows of 8 degrees.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:35 on LBC. I was joking about the chocolate digestive, but look what I've just been given. Unfortunately, it is a milk one. I like the dark chocolate better.
I agree with you.
So if you can do better next time. Right, let's go to a text question from Craig in Burton. But let me remind you, if you just tuned in, who's on the panel. Harriet Harman, Nicky Morgan, Lionel Barber and Ash Sarkar. I feel I don't need to repeat who you all are because people, well, they should know by now, shouldn't they? So Craig in Burton says, do you agree that the Overton window has moved significantly to the right on immigration and demographic change related issues? Where do you think this will take the country in 10 years' time? Which one of you would like to explain what the Overton window is?
So the Overton window is the window of reasonable opinion. And it can move. So what's considered a reasonable set of opinions, it can exclude something, 1 year and then move to include it another year.
Thank you for that. Now, what about the answer to the question?
Okay, I think that you need to sort of separate these things a bit. I think that when it comes to immigration, anti-immigration sentiment has clearly hardened. You look at polling, it's, really risen in issue salience in the last couple of years, particularly with small boats. And when it comes to demographic change, I think that you see the far right, and in particular, the most thuggish elements of, the street far right, trying to hijack the immigration issue to make it about race and ethnicity. And so you are seeing some really disgusting acts of racism across this country. The St. George's Cross being used as a symbol, not of unity and things that we've got in common, but a symbol of hatred, targeting mosques, spray painting them, putting up the flag outside the homes of people of colour, harassing women who wear the hijab, all this kind of thing. This is, I think, evidence that what the far right have tried to do is use the wedge issue of asylum hotels and immigration as a way to break open something bigger, which is, trying to advance the cause of an ethno-nationalist idea of this country. I don't see that reflected in the polling, though. Most people in this country think that you don't have to be white to be British. They think you don't have to be white to be English or Welsh or Scottish or Irish, for that matter. And the fastest growing ethnic group in this country, it's mixed race people. You can't stop people meeting and falling in love. It is. I think it's also fast growth because you're starting from a small number to a higher number, so that's going to count as the fastest. You can't stop people from connecting on a human level, and I think that's a beautiful thing. So smash up all the shops you want, scream the abuse you want. You can't stop people from overcoming the boundaries of race and ethnicity and learning to look each other in the eye.
See, I think the fact that you use that phrase ethno-nationalism there is revealing. It kind of points to what I think the question is getting at, because I'd never heard of this phrase until about 3 months ago when we had a guest on the programme who turned out to be a 23-year-old white ethno-nationalist. And
God, better things to do as a 23-year-old, no?
Well, yeah.
Nicky. There, go to the club.
Nicky.
So I think that there's no doubt that attitudes, as Asha said, has hardened. I wouldn't say in relation to immigration, I'd say in relation to illegal immigration, and particularly in relation to the boats. I think there's a massive, as ever, as always has been, a sort of, people aren't clear when you ask people about the numbers they think are coming here illegally and the numbers coming on the boats. It's often much higher than is actually the case. But I think that overall, this country is still incredibly receptive to people who want to come here from overseas, to study, to work, to bring their skills. And I think you're also right. I mean, of course, there are going to be some areas where there are issues, but there are many people who are in mixed race households, mixed race relationships, and many people, who just frankly want to live and let live with their colleagues as well. But there's no doubt, I think, if the current government is not able to make more of an impact on the numbers coming here across the Channel, or in relation to illegal immigration, we may have a question of sort of an answer if the government thinks they might have on that in a moment, then I think the attitudes are only going to harden. And the second part of the question is about demographic change. I do think people are more aware now of pressure on public services, on all sorts of resources caused by there being increased numbers, which of course is not happens everywhere, but lots of people experience those only in a city where the numbers appear to be getting bigger.
Harriet,
I think if you see people coming across in boats illegally, I don't think it's right wing to object to that. I think that people don't want people who nobody knows anything about going completely outside the rules and coming here. If you see your local hotel, which used to be used for wedding venues and for celebrating your son's GCSE results and family occasions, if you see that no longer available, but right in the heart of the community, but just instead with asylum seekers in it, I don't think it's right wing to feel that you don't agree with that and it's objectionable. I think that the racism has been amplified by this, but I don't think it's widened it. And I think that it's not a right-wing thing to want to make sure that there is not human trafficking of people and that employers are not employing people illegally on, with no rights. I don't think that is particularly a right-wing agenda. And in fact, it was in the government's manifesto to end the use of asylum hotels. That wasn't a right-wing thing. It was just recognising that it's not the way things should be organised. And
Harriet, the fact you've answered this question in that way, I think demonstrates that the answer to the question is yes, in the sense the Overton window has changed. I don't think, from having heard you talk on these issues on colleagues in the past, I don't think you'd have answered this question in that way.
But things
8
have
or 10
changed.
years ago. That's exactly.
But I don't think it's made people right-wing. I think it's raised people's concerns, but I think they're justified concerns. They're not right-wingness. Somebody's not a right-winger because they don't want their local hotel to be not available to them.
There's been a fundamental change in the terms of debate in the last 12 months, I would say. I think that this was happening in the background during the Brexit referendum. The notion, we've seen this in America, witnessed in America, the idea that the public doesn't have confidence in the security of their own borders, it's tremendously damaging. So these pictures of illegal immigrants on boats, many of them are refugees, but there are some, obviously they're economic migrants. They're not political refugees, a lot of them. Now, we can argue about the numbers, but the notion that has settled now that there's something wrong with both our border security and the legal arrangements surrounding how we treat these migrants. And that's why Jack Straw, that's why David Blunkett, now that's why I think Harriet, the language has changed. We've got to look at the international conventions that we signed
to be fair, I don't think David Blunkett's language has changed at all.
But I do think there's been a fundamental change in debate. Now, that is separate, and it's important to be separate from demographic change, because the number of economic migrants that are coming into this country is tiny compared to legal immigration that this successive governments have decided is necessary to sustain the economy.
So I think
and there have been huge numbers in that respect.
I think there's a few things here. One is that the asylum hotel system is indefensible. I think that it is a recipe for division. Yep. It is a recipe for community tensions.
And it's not right-wing to say that.
I think it lets everybody down, though, and I also think it lets asylum seekers down.
What's the alternative, though?
So I think that you would have to look at something more like housing people in the community. This is really difficult to do when we've got so much pressure on housing, because also we don't build enough council houses in particular.
But isn't that more divisive, where people see asylum seekers being housed in maybe a new development that the council has built and think, well, hang on a minute, we've got a homeless problem, we've got people on council waiting lists.
So the thing is that I think that if you agree with the premise that we've got a duty to take in people who are fleeing persecution. And I accept your point that when you've got, effectively unregulated small boats arrivals, you don't know that everyone is fleeing persecution. But if you accept the point that we've got a duty to these people, I personally don't think that we're doing our duty if we say, okay, well, let's stick them in warehouses, let's stick them in military bases, let's, put them, in a hotel where they're surrounded by people who mistrust them, with no support to integrate into the community. All right. The alternative to that is some kind of community housing provision. The second thing, and this is where I think the government is going entirely in the wrong direction, is that Yvette Cooper said she wants to make family reunions harder. One of the reasons people feel so upset about asylum hotels is because a lot of the time it's single men in big groups. Now, I can believe that when you have lots of single men in big groups, they don't always behave well. And that's got nothing to do with culture. That's got nothing to do with ethnicity. That's a tale as old as time.
But they've got nothing to do.
Yeah.
And actually, a government should be looking at putting these people to work as in other European countries while they're being processed.
They want to work. I mean, at Novara Media, we interview lots of people who are waiting for their asylum claim to come through, and they're saying we really want to work. And one of the things is that we've created the conditions for really exploitative employers to take advantage. So if you take food delivery apps like Deliveroo, Uber Eats, Just Eat, on those wages, it doesn't make sense to be a legal migrant because you've had to pay loads of money to come here and then you're earning poverty wages. Doesn't make economic sense. Two, there is a secondary market on these apps. So if I'm a legal migrant with a right to work here, I can make more money by effectively renting my account out to undocumented migrants to work. And it's excessive government policies which have created these conditions. So the asylum hotel system is indefensible. I think asylum seekers not being able to work is indefensible, and I think it creates more division. But I think we also have to talk about the way in which, because demographic change isn't just about immigration. It's also about, the balance of ethnicities in society. And just from being, the last remaining person on Twitter, boiling my own brain, the level of aggression and hostility and virulent racism that I've witnessed and been receiving in the last few weeks, it's really noticeable as an increase, really noticeable.
Right, we will move on in just a couple of minutes' time here on LBC. It's 8:46.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Just to update you on one of the stories we heard about during the news at 8:30 with Daryl, reports from Portugal now say that at least 15 people have been killed in Lisbon after a funicular rail car, have I said that right? Rail car was derailed. We'll bring you more on that information as we get it here on LBC. Harriet Harman, Nicky Morgan, Lionel Barber and Ash Sarkar with us taking your questions. Here's one from Omar in Bow. Why shouldn't a 15-year-old be allowed to buy just one single can of Red Bull? The government says it intends to ban the sale of energy drinks to under 16s across England from next year. Nicky, let's come to you first on that. Are you a consumer of Red Bull?
No, I'm not a consumer of Red Bull or any of the energy drinks. Look, I think the simple answer is that actually these drinks are not good for your health. And in the same way that we don't want young people to be vaping or smoking, if we're able to stop young people being able to consume things that are harmful,
where do you stop then? I mean, ban Coke.
It's already illegal, Ian.
Well,
no, not that kind of Coke. I trust you.
Well, obviously you've got the tax on high fat, sugar and salt. The foods that the high HFSS content. I understand the premise behind the question, which is, where do we stop? Why not? But one can. But the trouble is, some person's one can turns out to be, somebody drinking a lot of this stuff, and they're being unable to actually sit through a single lesson at school that day because they are so hyper that actually they are unteachable.
As the youngest person on this panel, Ash, what's your view?
I think that the central question here really is, should companies have unfettered access to children when the products that they're pushing have detrimental health effects? And I think that the sensible answer there is no. Now, obviously, what you would hope and what you would want is for, parents to be able to say, you're not allowed to drink fizzy drinks every day, blah, 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 blah. But I remember when I was at sixth form and there was the corner shop that was around the corner from school, and you'd go out on your break and you would load up on Monster and on Red Bull and all this stuff. And there are only more products now. So you take a drink like Prime. Have you heard of Prime?
I have heard of it. Never consumed it.
It looks like it contains 0 ingredients found in nature. But it's a drink which is pushed by a former YouTube streamer turned WWE wrestler called Logan Paul. It's marketed directly at children, and where they do sort of sponsorship deals is in products, cultural products which are likely to be consumed by children. And I think that there is something quite predatory there, because you're not talking about children occasionally accessing something which is intended for a wide market, like the occasional can of like Pepsi or the occasional Red Bull. Even you're talking about products which are designed to tap into an adolescent and a child market, and I don't think that should be completely unfettered and unrestricted.
Harriet?
Well, it's a public health measure, isn't it? Like Nicky said, it's like smoking. You don't allow people to sell cigarettes to children because it's damaging to their health. These sort of things, they're called apparently energy drinks, but they're just like full of sugar and caffeine, and they don't actually give you energy. They do make, this is an evidence-based public health measure. And I was remembering about Alka-Pops when you were talking, Ash, about directing it at children. I don't know whether you remember Alka-Pops. They had beautifully
Never
designed...
had one, Harriet.
Yeah, beautifully designed bottles designed to appeal to children and young people, and they were alcoholic drinks, and that has to be banned. So, a lot of people will say, oh, it's the nanny state, let people make up their own mind. But actually, the state has got a duty to promote public health and, above all, to protect children.
But what's the difference, though, between drinking one of these drinks and stuffing your face with Mars bars? we used to be told a Mars a day helps you work, rest and play. But it's clearly not true.
Oh, definitely.
Well, I
always had a Mars bar before I went out playing rugby on a Saturday morning. But it's ridiculous that the idea you're going to be able to police this for 15-year-olds. They've got to just have a sugar tax. And with Red Bull...
we have one, don't we?
No, but double sugar tax for Red Bull because it's got so much sugar in it. I say that having had Red Bull aged 40.
But what if this works?
Once when I was in school.
Lionel, what if it works? You agree with the end result, which is to stop kids doing it. Well, let's try what works.
Well, I go into the corner shops and I see all those crisps, all those fats, sodium and everything else, and that's what kids are.
Whoa! Leave the crisps alone, right? That's the hill I'm going to die on.
I just don't see how you can police this. I'm not against. I certainly believe in a sugar tax, and I have a double sugar tax.
But I think that there is this central question of enforcement that you're getting at, and I'm not necessarily sure that a ban is going to address the gap in enforcement. So when it comes to e-cigarettes, vapes, you see them come in all these pastel colours, these flavours like icy blueberry and fantastic strawberry and whatever. Being marketed at young people and children, and certainly, at least in the area that I live, I see plenty of people who are 13, 14, 15 buying these vapes, and they contain more nicotine than cigarettes. So there are lots of ways in which, so that's something which is illegal. It's not being enforced. And also because of the sort of colours and flavourings of these vapes, it's quite clearly marketed at, teenagers and young adults. Because I don't think there are many, 55, 60-year-olds who are like, oh yeah, I really want a kiwi flavoured Lost Mary right about now.
But people used to say about seatbelts, it'll never be able to be enforced. And they used to say that about smoking and selling kids cigarettes. It'll never be able to be enforced. Yeah, there are gaps in enforcement, and that should be, endeavoured to be sorting that out. But the question is whether or not you go with the idea that the state have got a responsibility and that the private market can't do whatever it wants if it's at the expense of children's health.
Well,
and you agree with that, don't
I do
you?
agree with that because we have a public health crisis.
We're running out of time, and I want to get to a question in before our fun question.
I'm rather dreading this fun question.
This is Jenny in Shoreham. What is the point of Lush shutting its shops for the day, as they put it, in solidarity with Gaza? What does that actually achieve? Now, the cosmetics retailer closed all of its shops across the UK, along with its factories and its website, with a message on that website saying, "Stop starving Gaza, we're closed in solidarity." Lush's co-founder, Mark Constantine, has told LBC that the company predicts this move will cost it around £300,000. Well, shame on us for giving him the platform, I would say, but there we are. Nicky.
Well, I'm afraid I think the point of them doing it is so that Jenny or another one of your listeners will ask this question, because that's job done. Lush have had the publicity now.
Lush?
Why shame on him, out of curiosity?
Oh, because it's just gratuitous virtue signalling. I can't stand it.
You can say the same out of any time you try and raise visibility for any cause. So if you to wear, a Ukraine pin, or if you were to, express any kind of solidarity with any country or cause, that's just virtue signalling. That's what politics is. It's virtue signalling.
That's an individual choice. It's not a company that has shut. And if they want to lose money, obviously they're a private enterprise. I suppose that's up to them. I mean, maybe the employees might not find it quite so comforting if that then puts the business at some.
What about the Jewish employees?
Risk.
So I think that, one, there's a conflation here between Jewish people and Israel, which, come on, Iain.
Well, that's true.
Come on.
No, I'll accept that, but they must, I don't know how many people they employ, but I'm sure that they will employ some Jewish people who may be very uncomfortable about that, but feel they can't speak out about it.
Lush has always been a company with a strong political philosophy, and it's not just been to do with Gaza, it's been to do with all kinds of things. That's why people shop at Lush, and that's why a lot of people want to be employed by Lush, because it reflects those values. I think that what Lush has been trying to do is saying that when there is a genocide going on, life cannot continue as normal. That there is something morally abhorrent about all of us going on our days.
Then.
Well, no,
that would make a statement, wouldn't it?
Well, it's also a way of raising visibility. It wasn't just Lush who paused their operations for a day.
The employers really would be suffering if they shut down the business.
Exactly.
Right, we haven't got much time left. 1 minute each. Harriet, do you shop at Lush?
I don't, but I would absolutely think it's their right to use their closing temporarily to actually make a protest about the horrendous activity of the Israeli government in Gaza. I mean, I just think they're entitled to do that. And people will do different things in the face of what is an absolutely appalling situation that should stop. So I think let them do that. Okay. Let them be part of that protest.
Lionel?
Up to them. It's a private company, as long as they don't penalise the workers for the shutdown. It should go on him.
Right, the question that Harriet's been looking forward to all programme. Sally in Aldershot. Topshop is returning to the high street from next year, reopening in some John Lewis stores. Which shop would you like to see come back next? Lionel.
Oh, I knew you were going to ask. I've got to be careful because it might be a shop that's still around, but in Clapham Junction, where I grew up, there was a shop called Arding and Hobbs in a beautiful
department store.
Yes.
And you could get lost and you could buy everything, and the service was great. And I could just see above the counter.
Harriet.
Those were the days. Well, I am afraid I've kind of gone online now, so I'm happy for everybody else to be shopping or not at Lush or other places or Topshop, but I'm shopping online, and also I'm trying to shop less. It's such a paradox that when clothes have become so cheap and so accessible, that we're so aware now of the danger of the rampant consumerism where people buy an outfit for a particular day and then never wear it again. So I'm like going to try and be virtuous on this and shop online and not shop too much.
I think I've seen you in that outfit before.
Yeah, you probably
because it's
have.
West Ham colours. That's why I remember it. Ash.
In Palmer's Green, where I grew up, there used to be this amazing bookshop, and it was just called the Palmer's Green Bookshop. And it's where I bought my first ever copy of the Communist Manifesto, because I thought if I conspicuously read political philosophy, boys would fancy me. It didn't work out that way at all. But
we used to read Mao's Little Red Book for that purpose. That takes you back.
Did that work?
That's where John McDonnell got it from. He got your copy, didn't he?
I've got
so what do you use now to make boys fancy you?
It's called Twitter. And it also works. I've just got so many fond memories of that bookshop, and feeling my intellectual horizons expand, and it's now some kind of salon. So I would bring back the Palmer's Green Bookshop.
Nicky.
Woolies. I loved Woolworths. It was a real thing.
Awful stench in it, I always thought.
It did in Tunbridge Wells.
It did in Saffron Walden.
But it was just one of those shops. It had everything, all the things you didn't know you needed. It wasn't, prices weren't expensive. When you got your pocket money, I think they did the pick and mix sweets as well. So that was always a bit of a treat.
Right, well, thank you all very much indeed. On Monday's panel, we have the Liberal Democrat from Bencher, former leader Tim Farron, the New Statesman political editor Tom McTague, he's got a new book out, and former butler to King Charles, Grant Harold. Yeah, Anyway, I'm looking forward to that. Right, in the next hour, we are going to be talking to Dave Ward. He's a regular on the programme. I don't know how many phone-ins we've done with him over the years, but it's quite a few. He is General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union. Somebody called Jonathan Allen on Twitter said earlier, he said, "You're the only programme that gives trade unionists a voice on the British media." Well, that may be a slight exaggeration, but we like to do that, actually, because not many people do. So if you have a question on trade unions, on the challenges facing people in the industry, I'm sure Dave would love to hear from you. 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, at least 15 people are reported to have died after Lisbon's famous